Hello, Rob Roselli coming to you once again on Clean TV Facebook page. Today being Thursday, August the 15th, 2016. Once again, website is boxofsunglasses.com, email info@boxofsunglasses.com, and Twitter @RobRoselli. And on the past several shows for the past month or so, we've been discussing the concept of Robert Christian, which is posted on my site under the Robert Christian link. Okay, there on my website, you can go and you go to the home page and go through to the table of contents. And there are really several books worth of information on page 10 on my site entitled Robert Christian. And it goes through this very mysterious character who sounds, just to be quite blunt, sounds like the biblical Satan. And as a matter of fact, his name, Robert Christian, or the rose plus the cross, is symbolic of the rose, or Osiris, the ancient Egyptian god Osiris, and his sister/wife Isis, and is emblematic of the Rosicrucians, or a group known as the Invisible College. It's one and the same with the Invisible College of Enlightenment Britain and Europe. And out of the Invisible College, of course, came the British Royal Society. And out of that group of intellectuals, the European Illuminati, which eventually gave us the American Illuminati, known as Skull and Bones. And out of the offshoots, the British Roundtable groups, the American Council on Foreign Relations, and the Rockefeller, Morgan, Rothschild groups, known as the Bilderberg Group, the Trilaterals, okay, the United Nations, the whole conglomerate, the whole pile of crap, if you will, of elitist, Satan-worshipping elitists that run the Western Hemisphere, trying to run the world, but they're running into a lot of issues as of late, as predicted in the prologue and introduction to my book, The Un-American Genocidal Complex, will be the focus of tonight's show. We introduced it last time, but just to review what I've just said, I mean, the front cover, again, the Georgia Guidestones, what I consider the anti-10 Commandments, or the 10 Commandments of the radical environmental movement. We'll develop that a little bit, brought to us by a mysterious character by the name of Robert Christian, which is representative of the rose, the Osiris, or male, plus the cross, the female, the four kingdoms of nature, or the Rosicrucian degree of the Freemasons, or 18th degree. And of course, our Freemasons, Satan-worshipping overlords, really do venerate the Bible as a source of information, not as a source of divine wisdom or in any kind of born-again Christian sense, but in a sense that they think it has all the answers, just like any other book of wisdom, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, etc., etc. They look at the Bible as just another one of those books that kind of gets them to the secrets of the universe. So it's no coincidence that they would assign the 18th degree, or 6 plus 6 plus 6 degree, to the Rose Cross, or the Rosicrucian degree of Freemasonry. Okay, and of course this is reflected in Revelation 13:8, where it says to count or calculate the number of the beast as 636. Is the number of a man, which is the Robert Christian, the name of the mysterious builder of these things, the Georgia Guidestones. Okay, we'll get into that a little bit in the show. So in other words, there's a lot more to the quote conspiracy than the silly comic book, Satan pitchfork in hand, or getting into a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem, whatever nonsense the Trinity Broadcast Network happens to put on that night. It's much more pervasive, it's much more evil, it's much more in our faces than we care to realize. Okay, and that's what we're discussing tonight in the Un-American Genocidal Complex. Okay, and let me just repeat, I try to go through every show the three basic principles. I try to keep this as simple as possible. I mean, as simple as it can be. Make it into digestible little packets of information as best I can, and squeeze it into an hour to an hour and a half show twice a week. But of course, again, all the information that I on this show, I'm not speaking in a vacuum. I'm not pulling stuff out of my hind quarters. Okay, it's all fully documented on my site. Again, that's boxofsunglasses.com. Now, there's three basic principles that you have to understand. Okay, one is that the Bible is the infallible Word of God. No ifs, ands, or buts. Okay, the King James Bible, I mean, there's other versions out there, a New Living Translation, a New International Version, the NIV. There's just a lot of different versions. Yeah, Gideon's Bible. Okay, but for the most part, I consider the King James Bible the authorized version, as it's called. Some people argue that point. I mean, Strong's exhaustive concordance is based on it. But anyway, the Bible is the infallible Word of God. So when it says God created the universe in 7 days, it says what it means, and it means what it says. Jesus is the only Son of God. It says what it means, and it means what it says. There's no arguing. If you like to argue the points, if you like to insert human interpretations, like the Catholic, the so-called Catholic Church is, trying to insert theological evolution or some theistic evolution or whatever pile of crap they're trying to insert in there, doesn't really work out too good. So it's a take it all or leave it all proposition, and on this show we take it all. Number two, as an offshoot of that, Israel, national Israel, okay, is absolutely not God's chosen people. I can't believe how idiotic somebody has to be, or deceptive, or both, to sit here and say that Israel has any kind of leading role in end times events, okay, from a biblical perspective. And it does have its role, okay, and it will have its role, but for right now, what's been happening for the past 2,000 years and what's happening right now, Israel's a minor leaguer, okay, and they're not God's chosen people, all right? They broke the covenant. I mean, the whole title, the New Testament, means New Covenant, okay? And if you go back, and I've gone over this, but if you read Matthew 23, he asked the Pharisees how you can escape being condemned to hell. And the Pharisees, a couple chapters later in Matthew's Gospel, for instance, get the whole crowd to go against Jesus, okay? Just after they made a covenant with Judas / Satan himself, because Satan entered into Judas, which sounds a lot like a certain Pharaoh president, which we'll get into here in a second. New article posted on Pharaoh Barry Obama. But anyway, getting back to the Jews, I mean, they just literally made a pact with Satan, and then a little bit after that, they convinced the Jewish people at large to go against Jesus. And Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, had agreed to release Jesus, and he said, "Shall I crucify your king?" Now, he was being somewhat facetious and somewhat sarcastic, but again, he was getting kind of convinced that maybe there was more to Jesus than meets the eye. And he asked him, "Shall I crucify your king?" And then they say, "Crucify him." And he says, "I wash my hands of this man's blood. It is your responsibility." And then the Jews respond, "His blood be on us and our children." So does that sound like God's chosen people to you? I mean, we can spend an entire show, and perhaps it's worth it, just to dispel the nonsense, just because it's so pervasive in the so-called evangelical movement in the United States. But anyway, suffice it to say for right now that Israel is not God's chosen people, okay? And I'm not saying that from an anti-Zionist. I'm not one of these, Jewish conspiracy people either. Israel does have a right to exist, and I respect its position and what it's doing over there in the Middle East and defending itself from 100 million people that literally want to push it into the Mediterranean Sea. But so realize I'm speaking from a strictly biblical perspective when I say that. And that really segues into principle number 3, is that there is no doubt whatsoever that the Mystery Babylon of Revelation is the United States. And in fact, I have a line-by-line breakdown of Revelation 17 and 18, which is I believe, the physical manifestation of the punishment of the mother of harlots. It's not, well, it is. I mean, it's broken down line by line. You can read about that on the Mystery Babylon USA link of my site, and that's another show or more in and of itself that will kind of tuck away. But there's no doubt, okay, nobody's ever going to convince me that it's the Catholic Church or literal Iraq. I mean, a lot of so-called experts were running around saying, oh, the United States invaded Iraq, now they're going to rebuild Babylon, and that's the mystery Babylon of the Bible. Stupid asses. But anyway, some people say it's Saudi Arabia. No, it's no doubt it's the United States. If you read the descriptions, and in fact, I'll just say it in general, that the current events as they're happening, as this worldwide uprising against this nation, this shell, and it's not, and when I say this nation, I'm talking about the Un-American Genocidal Complex-Controlled United States of America, which isn't my country. This takeover by the Illuminati, devil-worshipping, Rockefeller, Rothschild, banking, media, Northeastern Ivy League liberal elites, okay, these genocidal maniacs, these psychopaths, it's not my country. Okay, so realize that it might physically be called the United States. It might physically still exist, but this is a mystery Babylon, and we're gonna get into that, reasons why a little bit more tonight. There's just it's just not arguable. Okay, and I should mention this too. Another movie that really help you understand the concept of this show is John Carpenter's They Live. Okay, low budget, marginal acting, 1980s horror flick. That's not really what I'm getting at. The theme, thematically, what that movie was saying was spot on to the whole conspiracy. That is, it's much more pervasive, and it illustrates our sellout leadership and getting in bed with these so-called aliens. But I do find it very interesting in John Carpenter's movie that the people that discovered the quote conspiracy from the beginning was an elderly black priest who was blind in a small congregation, small church in Los Angeles. Okay, so John Carpenter was onto something there. Okay, and in general, not to go off on a John Carpenter tangent right now, but he's made several movies that to me are spot on to the quote conspiracy. He made another movie called To the Mouth of Madness, which it wasn't nearly as popular as They Live, but I highly recommend watching it, and you'll see in it what's really disturbing. It is a reflection, an exact replica of the modern day United States and where we are headed as a society into general societal breakdown and a chaos and a Mad Max kind of scenario. So that's really two excellent movies by John Carpenter that I highly recommend. And as a matter of fact, this book right here, Pleased to Meet You, is available on my site. Again, boxofsunglasses.com. You can get it on Amazon. And I say right in the introduction, it's based on, of course, Mick Jagger's song, Pleased to Meet You. It kind of tells history embedded within Mick Jagger's song. But it's based on John Carpenter's They Live and To the Mouth of Madness. Okay. It's a fictional book. It's a fictional conversation, but the events and the topics that are discussed are right out of history and right out of the Bible. Okay. There's a biblical verse behind a lot of what is discussed in that book. Okay. And it's meant as a kind of to short circuit and change the mindset. If you happen to be watching right now, get you out of this Fox News endless election cycle garbage news coverage as the world economy is literally imploding before our eyes as these genocidal psychopaths led by the image of the beast, Pharaoh Barry Obama, the multi-named, half-white, long-legged Mac Daddy con artist scam that occupies the White House. Okay, where Fox News and the other idiots in the so-called mainstream news have us focused on endless polls and just repetitive, nonsensical garbage. Okay, the economy, in true They Live fashion, is collapsing before our eyes. The debt, our debt-based Federal Reserve fake economy is collapsing before our eyes. It's coming to its mathematical certainty, its mathematical endpoint. Okay, when I say this is in They Live fashion, so in other words, Proverbs 22:7, the debtor is slave to the lender, which basically means we're all slaves. Okay, this is a point that was brought out in Carpenters They Live. Okay, but think about this. Okay, it is a mathematical certainty that this economy will collapse. And this was a mathematical certainty from its inception with the Federal Reserve Act in 1913 and the modern day money changers, the Rockefellers, your Morgans, your Rothschilds, your Warburgs, etc., etc. Later on, your Harrimans and your Bush crime family. Okay, the 3 generations skull and bones Bush crime family. Okay, Mr. Weapons of Mass Destruction Bush, that Bush family. But anyway, ever since its inception, ever since we took $1 from the Federal Reserve Act, signed into law by that progressive sellout, that hero of Queen Jezebel Clinton, Woodrow Wilson. Okay, as soon as we took $1, just like a bacteria, just like an economic, it's like an economic bacteria. As soon as we borrowed $1 from the Federal Reserve, we were done. Okay, theoretically and mathematically, we were done because that dollar would collect interest. It was created out of nothing, but it would collect interest. It would always collect interest, so it would always grow, and it could never be paid back. Okay, so think about that. So if you got one plague bacteria in your body, in and of itself, it's not going to do any damage, but over time, that's going to geometrically increase. It's going to split into 2, and then 4, and then 8. So you're going to get an exponential increase. Just it's a similar fashion. The same thing happens with money that's being lent out at interest, especially money created out of nothing that's lent out at interest. So think about this. Every economic expert, every Harvard, University of Chicago, Cal Berkeley economic expert that gets on these channels or teaches these idiot college kids these economics courses are all full of crap. Okay, just like in the movie They Live, okay, when they open up the magazines and the books, and underneath all the writing is words like accept and obey and go home and eat, watch TV, these kinds of things. Okay, so underneath all this complexity, it's really quite simple. This is why I highly recommend They Live. This economy is going to collapse. It's a mathematical certainty, and it always was a mathematical certainty. So everything overlaying it, all the economics books, all the doctorates, all the experts, they're all full of crap. Think about that. Okay, that's just the economy. When's the last time you heard that on Fox News and somebody got on there and honestly said, we're in trouble. Okay, the online deficit of the government is 19 trillion. The offline deficit is something like 200 to 300 trillion, depending on which source you listen to. And I don't want to go off on that tangent right now. I don't give you the names. And I don't have Gerald Celente, okay, Rob Kirby, Kirby, Gregory Mannarino. Okay, you can go on YouTube or Google or whatever and Google these names. Jim Willie is another one. And I try to listen to some or all these people at least a few times a week just to keep tabs on the real economic crisis, not the Fox News pile of crap. These mimbos and bimbos that get on and like comic book characters with their stupid music and their nonsense and their pointless guests. Okay, these guys are the real deal. So I'm not going to sit here and repeat a bunch of economic statistics that those guys, are much more. It's much more their expertise than mine, and I don't see the need to spend time regurgitating what you can just listen to. And again, I don't have any. Those people have no idea who I am. Okay, Gerald Celente, well, I did speak with him when I did have a radio show several years back. He was gracious enough to come on with me, but they don't know. But I'm just so. But just to have an idea, just to keep in real time, what's going on with the economy and the non-Fox News world, which it does get depressing, but in the aggregate, we're in deep doo-doo here economically. Okay, we will have an economic calamity of biblical proportions. Okay, and I pointed this out in my breakdown of Revelation 17 and 18. Okay, and then we're going to have a very quick nuclear war ambush of the United States. And that seems to be the scenario that's unfolding. Okay, and after that, you get your little battle of Armageddon and Israel. They'll surround Israel and all that. I don't want to get into that right now, but But again, that loops back to the Mystery Babylon USA I was alluding to before. So what I'm getting at is, and I guess right now in the aggregate, this nation is evil. Okay, this quote conspiracy is huge. The quote conspiracy is everywhere. It's anywhere and everywhere. Okay, just as Satan offered Jesus the kingdoms of the earth in Matthew 4 and Luke 4, it means the whole earth is under his guidance. Now, remember to go back in Joel, okay, the sun shall be darkened and the moon shall not give off her light. And Jesus, John chapter 8, I am the true light. Now I'm just going to go with some biblical references here. And in Matthew 5, Jesus says in a Sermon on the Mount, your eye is the lamp of the body. If the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And I start saying, what the hell does that mean? If the light that is in you is darkness. Now what he's talking about is this worship of the sun god Osiris, okay, which is, again, I'm not going to go into it. I've talked about it ad nauseum on the past several shows, and those shows will be posted in my YouTube channel, and I'll start getting that YouTube channel out, and you can go back and go over past shows or read about it on my website. But this worship of the sun god is right here in the aforementioned Federal Reserve Bank, okay, the 13 rows, which is symbolic directly of Osiris, okay, who was killed, symbolically killed, and his body was chopped up into 13 pieces. And the 14th piece, which represents the reformed Osiris, he's based on the number 14, which is very interesting. It has a lot of biblical parallels, okay, which perhaps we can get into in a future show on Revelation and Apollyon and Revelation 9 and all that. But the 14th level, the 13th level pyramid, is this all-seeing illuminated eye of Apollo or Osiris or Nimrod. Okay, and it's reflected here, no pun intended, in the Cathedral of St. John's the Divine, right in the middle of New York City, or what I call Mystery Babylon USA. Okay, this thing was financed by J.P. Morgan, and I have just copious information on St. John's the Divine Cathedral, by the way. As a matter of fact, I just posted a link. If you go back onto the homepage of my site, and it's called the Mystery Babylon USA ebook, and that one there is for free. The only two things for sale on my website, and I could use the support, but I'm not asking for donations. I don't have advertising. I don't, I just don't. Okay, I don't have agreements with other websites and names I throw out. Okay. There's this book here, which we're going to talk about, I promise, in a minute. And this book here, okay, pleased to meet you. But the numerology of abomination is chapter 3, okay? And I go into a deeper conversation on this place, okay? Which implicit in this place on the western wall of this building, okay, as any cathedral in the world, okay, is the rose, or the rose window. Okay, now the rose is symbolic of, again, the dead sun god Osiris. Okay, so when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, the Freemasons, remember I said the Freemasons and our Satan-worshipping overlords study the Bible, but from the exact diametric opposite from what a true Christian would venerate the Bible. They look at the Bible as, it's their little code book. It's their way of understanding the world's secrets, or so they think. So in other words, they really think that Satan got a raw deal back there in the Garden of Eden. Satan and got kicked out of heaven, and Adam and Eve getting kicked out of the garden. So that rose resembles secrecy in the west, and the sun setting in death. So on the western wall, right below this pyramid, is something called the rose window. Now, of course, in the east you have the Great Cross, and of course facing east you have the rising sun, which is symbolic of the sun god arising, okay? And where else do we see the symbolism? But again, getting back to this, the sun rising, or light, or illumination, or Illuminati, is right here with the 14th row of this 13-level pyramid, symbolic of Osiris. So you can see how all this stuff connects, okay? So the rose and the cross are prevalent in St. John's Divine Cathedral, which means they're prevalent in every cathedral throughout Western Europe. Now we're going backwards in time. So where were these cathedrals? Where did they come from? They came from the Knights Templar. Okay, and who was in the middle of all this, of the Rosicrucians, the Knights Templar, the Invisible College, the French Revolution? But this mysterious character by the name of Robert Christian, which again, I'm being redundant here, and it's not an accident. Okay, Robert Christian, again, the 18th degree, or 6 + 6 + 6 degree of Freemasonry, okay, who I tied directly into the Egyptian god Thoth, perhaps Horus, the Greek god Hermes, the Roman god Mercury, okay, which I believe really aligns with the biblical Satan. Okay, so in other words, Robert Christian, you can't trace him in history. There's so much written about the man, but it's literally impossible to pin this guy down, whether he lived or not. And a lot of sources have him living over several centuries. His legend, according to some, goes for thousands of years. According to others, he lived in the late 1700s. He was mainly responsible for that disaster known as the French Revolution. Okay, he was in the middle of the formation of the Illuminati in Europe. But supposedly, his legend, the legendary Robert Christian, lived in the years 1400 to the 1500, around the Enlightenment in Europe. And again, I spent several shows going much deeper into this, but the point is, you have a guy here, just in one snapshot, okay, a guy who lived 400 years or so after his legends. In other words, the real Robert Christian, according to most sources, according to, I'm going to say, the consensus has him living in the late 18th century, okay? But his legend, okay, supposedly was around, it was symbolic, but was around, say, in the 1400s to the 1600s. So how the hell, no pun intended, can a legend precede this guy for several hundred years? And I know it gets confusing because, and it is confusing, okay? Just like in a deceptive Satan kind of way, it is very confusing trying to track this guy down. And the best thing I can say, it's hard to, and I'm not really doing it justice, but the Robert Christian link on my site is worth reading, or at least the first couple of links. Just, there's literally 2 or 3 books buried in those links by itself that I could have written, and I don't have the time. I have a full-time day job. I don't have the resources. I don't have the money, okay, to sit here and just write books all day. So I write the PDFs, okay, they're documented and they're posted on my website, okay, but just to give some background to what we're talking about here, because the reason Robert Christian is important, again, is because a guy by the name of Robert Christian gave us the Georgia Guidestones, okay, which sit at the core of the Un-American Genocidal Complex. Now, the Un-American Genocidal Complex is one and the same with what John F. Kennedy called the military-industrial complex, okay, or the Eastern Establishment, or Skull and Bones, whatever you want to call it. I call it the Un-American Genocidal Complex because the focal point, besides the United States, or the rapidly failing United States, is the United Nations, the Rockefeller-founded United Nations. Okay, and I'll just say this, the United Nations is home to the radical environmental movement, okay, that's really, forget peace, okay, forget world peace, okay, United Nations was supposedly, to set up the world peace. Now all of a sudden, it's at the forefront, or it's the focal point of the radical environmental movement. Okay, that's not an accident, okay? And I'm not talking, again, I'll say it again, I'm not talking about legitimate environmental movements like Save the Whales and Save the Endangered Animals, okay? I'm not talking about that. I don't have a problem with those people, okay? I kind of respect them. They're standing up and fighting for something they believe in. I don't have a problem with, not being cruel to animals. And that's not what I'm saying, okay? I'm not Rush Limbaugh. I'm not going to sit here and dump on those people. And I'm not saying there's not legitimate environmental problems in this nation. And by the way, just as an aside, okay, all the money we waste on these stupid wars and this global warming and this climate change scam and also all this nonsense, all this misguided nonsense takes away from solving legitimate environmental problems, okay? And not only that, okay, the environmental movement, if you want to save the environment, let me put it to you this way. The best place to start, the best people to get rid of would be the radical environmental movement. These global warming, climate change freaks, okay, who advocate things like mercury light bulbs and spraying the atmosphere with sulfur particles to block the sun. Okay, I guess these people never took high school biology and the concept of the sun and the carbon cycle and photosynthesis and all this other kind of nonsense, but spraying this atmosphere with sulfur particles, which is a form of geoengineering, which is a whole other, I don't even get into geoengineering, okay? It's out there. There's a website out there called Geoengineering Watch, and that's I don't want to go off on a tangent right now, but okay, but the point is, the radical environmental movement, they're a bunch of non-scientific crackpots. They're nothing but a bunch of devil-worshipping, nature-worshipping, genocidal psychopaths and Malthusian freaks, all right? That's all they are, useful idiot underlings to the Rockefeller, Rothschild, United Nations complex, or the Un-American Genocidal Complex, who are using radical environmentalism and this scam known as climate change to achieve their new world order, okay? So that's another way of saying it. The United Nations has morphed into this crusader for this, against this scam known as global warming, global cooling, climate change. Okay, and that's really what's happening here. Okay, so when I say these maniacs, these radical environmentalists are nothing but a bunch of Malthusian freaks and genocidal maniacs, I mean that literally. Okay, hence the Un-American Genocidal Complex. Now maybe that's a good jumping point. Maybe that's a segue into this book. Okay, because Thomas Malthus was the first radical environmentalist. He lived the late 1700s. Okay, he wrote. Basically, his writings. If I could sum up his writings, he's saying, well, the Earth's resources cannot keep up. Can only be increased in a linear fashion, and the Earth's population will increase in an exponential fashion. Hence, we're going to get to a point where we're going to have a population explosion, and the Earth's resources aren't going to be able to sustain it. People will starve to death, yada, yada, yada. So we have to start, controlling the population, bringing in things like abortion, especially the lower levels, the lower rungs of society. We're going to have to start euthanizing people, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if this sounds familiar, it should, because it's called social Darwinism. Now, Darwin was a huge supporter of Thomas Malthus, so already you had this marriage, this unholy marriage of radical environmentalism and evolution, okay, starting with Charles Darwin. Now, Darwin, again, is the foundation for the American/British, the Anglo-American eugenics movement. Okay, eugenics means good genes. This is where Adolf Hitler got a lot of his ideas from. Okay, so between Darwinism and Malthusian environmentalism, you had this porridge, this stew of death. Okay, that started in the 1800s, gave rise to Adolf Hitler, and Adolf Hitler was gone. And it's given rise to the radical environmental movement, okay? And if you think I'm kidding, these people are serious, okay? But again, the environmental movement is nothing but a Rockefeller, Rothschild, and some other United Nations elites controlled movement to rid the earth of billions of people, okay? Now, getting back to Darwin, okay? Now, his so-called science, and I touched on this the other night. Now, his so-called science classified people into different groups. Okay, he had a classification system. Okay, that reads just like Adolf Hitler's. Okay, as a matter of fact, you have to excuse me. I can't find it right now, but on my site, okay, and I'll try and look for it. actually on page 3, okay, it's called The Theory of Evolution. I have what's called an evolution quote quiz, just to kind of summarize this point, okay? Again, that's page 3 of my site, boxofsunglasses.com. If you go on there, I have an evolution quote quiz, okay, and just to kind of accentuate this point of the parallelism, okay, or the relations between the Anglo-American eugenics, Darwinist, social Darwinist movement, and Adolf Hitler and his Nazis, okay. I have what's called the evolution quote quiz, okay, and the characters, like a game show, okay, like a satanic game show, we'll call it, okay, and I have Progressive Negro Project founder Margaret Sanger. Now, as I've said repeatedly on a show, let's just talk about Margaret Sanger for 1 second, okay? She was an American woman, a so-called feminist, okay, and her big thing was, she was a huge believer in eugenics, as was popular in America at the time. Well, I wouldn't say America, but amongst the white, progressive, liberal, Ivy League, Cal Berkeley, Rockefeller banking elite, eugenics and social Darwinism was popular. It wasn't popular amongst your everyday Americans, okay? But out of that movement came this woman, Margaret Sanger, okay? And her big mantra was, why are we wasting time and money euthanizing and sterilizing and incarcerating people into sanitariums and mental hospitals and this sort of thing? Why not just kill these people before they're even born? Okay, and in particular, she had a particular disdain for Negroes, in her own words. Okay, so out of her was born, no pun intended, the American Birth Control League. Okay, and her goal, in her own words, was to go into black areas and convince blacks that they needed to be, the population needed to be controlled and their numbers needed to be controlled. Okay, but she wanted to cover that up. Okay, and she had a love fest going with Adolf Hitler. Okay, as I said on the last show. Okay, and she was forced to change her name from the American Birth Control League because there was so much connectiveness to Adolf Hitler. Okay, for obvious reasons in the 1940s. I think it was 1942. She had to change the name to Planned Parenthood. Okay, so when Queen Jezebel, Hillary Clinton, gets on stage and collects the Margaret Sanger Award and then turns around and tries to go out and get the black vote and calls Trump supporters deplorable and racist. And I'll say it again. What the hell is going on with black people? Read your history, please. There's a few people out there. There's groups out there. Okay, Jesse Lee Peterson, okay, and others that are trying to ring the bell in the black community. But this Queen Jezebel, this Hillary, okay, the modern day Margaret Sanger, she accentuates, she symbolizes the Un-American Genocidal Complex. She gives it these shadows, these Rockefeller people that hide in the shadows, she gives it a public face, okay? But anyway, you got Adolf Hitler, you got Charles Darwin, you got the aforementioned Thomas Malthus, and you got a progressive eugenicist, some people may not, less familiar, Henry Osborne, okay? But I go through different quotes, okay? And what's disturbing is the point of the article or the quiz is that you can't tell the difference between Hitler, Darwin, Margaret Sanger, the aforementioned Thomas Malthus, the original population control zealot, and the cell eugenicist by the name of Henry Osborne, okay? And the answers are at the bottom, but read through it, and that's just a quick snapshot into the mindset of our Darwinist, eugenics, abortion movement, white liberal elite progressives that are still around today as symbolized by Queen Jezebel. Okay, and I'm not sold on this presidential election, okay? The presidency is nothing, okay? Trump, maybe he's bringing America back a little bit, but not nearly enough, okay? We're Nineveh, okay? We're in the book of Jonah in the Old Testament, okay? We're Nineveh, and if you think Trump is going to, cry out to God for mercy and tell the nation we must get in sackcloth and ashes, it ain't going to happen, okay? So basically, we're cooked, okay? You can't be a true Christian and believe that Trump has any chance of saving this nation. Okay, and I'm not denigrating Trump followers and supporters. They generally love this country and they want to take it back, but these people here, the Un-American Genocidal Complex, who have been around really since the Garden of Eden, they ain't giving it back. Okay, and their Pharaoh, Barry Obama, Pharaoh Barry, we'll call him, okay, he ain't giving up his power. These people aren't leaving. They're like mooches, okay? They like termites. They've infected this country. They're entrenched. They ain't going anywhere. Okay, Trump is a speed bump on the American highway to hell, and I'll just leave it at that. Okay, and hopefully you'll see what I'm getting at here as we go through the Un-American Genocidal Complex. Okay, but anyway, so we've already pretty much established that the eugenics movement gave us Adolf Hitler, and I just want to go through some information here. And by the way, it wasn't just the philosophical eugenics kind of love fest and agreements that the Anglo-American liberal elites had with Hitler. There was direct financial assistance to get Hitler where he was too. Okay, this came from American companies like IBM, General Motors, General Electric, Ford. Okay, Standard Oil, which was an offshoot of the Rockefeller Standard Oil. Okay, they formed a company called IG Farben, which was the industrial backbone of Nazi Germany. Okay, so you may not read about this in your history books. You're certainly not going to hear about it on Fox News, but that's basic. That's a well documented history. Okay, that's one of these things that gets kind of swept underneath the rug. Okay, here, and again, you're not going to hear it on the mainstream news, but again, it's fully documented here. Okay, and I'm going to say it. There's one book, okay, and it's a very long book. It's called War Against the Weak by, surprisingly enough, a New York Times writer by the name of Edwin Black. Okay, and it's a long read. It's 500 pages. I can honestly say I didn't read the whole book, but if there was one source that I relied upon to build the foundation, besides, of course, Darwin in his own words, okay, and Margaret Sanger in her own words, and this sort of thing, but Edwin Black does an excellent job in a book called War Against the Weak that documents all of this, okay, and I don't know how such a great writer with such great information can come out of the New York Times, the bought and sold American prop known as the New York Times. But anyway, that is probably the number one source for this book, okay? And there's many other sources. I mentioned the Stryker Memorandum the other night, okay? And we'll get into that in a little bit. But the overall point of the first several chapters, okay, is the foundation, is the philosophical / industrial financial foundation of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany, okay? And again, we have to, in parallel to all this, we have radical environmentalism. And Hitler, just like the modern-day New Age radical environmental movement, was heavily into occultism and heavily into nature worship, okay? So in addition to trying to create the world in his white Aryan image, as he was philosophically obligated to do under Darwinism, okay, he also heavily venerated nature and occultism. As a matter of fact, the Nazi swastika is nothing but a symbol of the Buddhist sun god. Okay, it's a Buddhist sun god symbol, just like the all-seeing illuminated eye that I showed you before is a symbol of the sun god, the Egyptian sun god Osiris, or his equivalent, the Greek sun god Apollo, or Apollyon from Revelation chapter 9, or Nimrod, okay, the first king of the first beast kingdom known as Babel, okay. So what's another thing that you have to kind of laugh at, okay, when these idiots try to paint Trump as a Hitler or a Nazi? It's the most asinine, stupid thing. It doesn't make any sense. It's against everything. It's like black people supporting modern day Queen Jezebel / Margaret Sanger and Hillary Clinton. Okay, if you take her to, she wants you dead. There's no other way to read that. Okay, that's just, and we're getting down to brass tacks here. That's just the evil. Okay, so when I call Hillary Queen Jezebel, there's a reason for that. Okay, but the point is this is just, it's just evil. Okay, I don't mean to keep going off on these tangents, but it's hard to keep things tight here. But I guess what I'm saying is the philosophy of Nazism is one and the same with American liberalism and progressivism. Okay, abortion, eugenics, radical environmentalism, state control of healthcare. Okay, these are all American liberal foundations, pillars of American liberalism. Okay, look, you may not agree or disagree with Trump, and again, I'm not a huge supporter. Okay, I think we're way beyond a simple presidential election. Okay, and again, the American Genocidal Complex ain't going anywhere. Okay, they're not going to let their son of God Pharaoh president fail. Okay, and I'm convinced we're not even going to have a presidential election. Okay, and I posted a link again on my site, and I'll go off on a tangent with Pharaoh Barry. He ain't going anywhere. But the point is, okay, is that we're in the midst of evil here, and it's all emanating from this country. Okay, so it's hard to get your hands around it. I'm only talking about Adolf Hitler, by the way. Okay, this un-American genocidal complex also gave rise to Mao in China and Stalin in Russia. Okay, and again, when you look at just to talk about those philosophies, okay, and they make Hitler. Okay, Hitler's a minor leaguer compared to Mao and Stalin in terms of just raw numbers of millions of people murdered. Okay, and I picked Adolf Hitler out of the, because he seems to be the most popular. Well, I won't say popular. Say most well known. People don't know as much about Stalin or Mao. Okay, of China, but again, if you trace back the roots of Stalin and Mao, they were huge fans of Charles Darwin. Now, why were they huge fans of Darwin? Okay, again, you get the whole concept of social Darwinism, but what Darwinism does, okay, it's not science. Okay, remember we discussed that on the last show in brief. Okay, it's not based on any scientific law. Just because the American Civil Liberties Union and a bunch of so-called scientific experts and Richard Dawkins get on and laugh at Christians doesn't make evolution science. Okay, if you read Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, or The Preservation of the Favored Races in a Struggle for Life, okay, the subtitle, The Origin for Species, which could have been the subtitle for Hitler's Mein Kampf. But anyway, there's no science in that book, okay? Newton's laws, remember I discussed Newton's laws. There's no way to reconcile Newton's laws, scientific laws of motion, with the Big Bang Theory. It just doesn't add up. There's no scientific basis for it from a strictly, and I'll say this again, okay, science and math are completely godless, okay, in a sense that, I don't mean from a creation standpoint, I mean, F equals ma, okay, or Newton's laws of motion. And I'll say this again, and I made this very simple high school physics argument in evolution debates with all kinds of so-called experts, and I didn't get a scientific answer, and I never did expect one, because I knew there was none, okay. You can't expect something to explode and then come up with the concept of the Earth revolving around the sun, for instance. It just doesn't work, okay. So then the question becomes, the question I asked was, well, does Newton's laws, do they apply? Do they apply at the time of the Big Bang, or what's the story? I got a lot of insults, okay. I got a lot of whatever, and I don't care. I couldn't care less about what a bunch of boobs think of me. That's fine. I'm not here for a popularity contest, but the point that I was making was Darwinism isn't about science. It was never about science, okay? It was just one British elitist's facade to cover up his own racism, his own disdain for minorities and what he considered inferior races. Okay? So again, we're circling back again to that American white liberal elite kind of mindset that gave us eugenics and Adolf Hitler. But it also gave us Mao and Stalin, okay? Because now they had the justification, well, God doesn't exist because Darwin says he doesn't exist. So now we can go on and, eliminate millions of people because now if God doesn't exist, well, I'm God and I make the rules. And I say, well, millions of people need to die because we can't feed them. They don't want to cooperate with the state. They don't want to be part of the state. Well, then they can just go into mass graves and die. You had things like, Stalin forcing farmers off their land, okay, demanding that farmers don't make a profit for raising their crops, resulting in famines. You had Mao's Great Leap Forward, his Cultural Revolution, and this sort of thing. If you don't support the state, you just have to die. And tens and hundreds of millions of people died under those too, and they were huge Darwin fans. So you see where this is going. Okay, so again, evolution isn't just something, the American Civil Liberties Union, those communist pedophile defending lowlifes at the American Civil Liberties Union. It's not just something about separation of church and state or some nonsense. Okay, it goes much, much deeper and much bigger than that. Okay, and who's exporting Darwinism to the world? Okay, where did it all start? It started in the Anglo-American establishment. Okay, the Rothschild-Rockefeller complex, or the Un-American Genocidal Complex. So now hopefully the picture's starting to form as to why the United States, there's no question, okay, there hasn't not been such an evil entity in the history of the world as the current Un-American Genocidal Complex. It's just not there. Okay, so there's no way in hell, no pun intended, knowing that this country, okay, and again, this is a shell. This isn't my country. Okay, cannot be the mystery Babylon of Revelation 17 and 18. Okay, so besides all the wars, besides the current mayhem happening in the world that you don't hear about on Fox News, outside of this endless stupidity known as the presidential election, these nonsensical wars, this psychopathic drive for World War III, and Putin and China are moving economically and militarily to isolate and basically destroy the United States. Okay, because they recognize the evil that emanates from this nation. Okay, we export debt in the form of Federal Reserve notes in our scam economy, and we export genocide, and we export military hardware. Okay, and we kill babies, murder in God's eyes by the millions. Okay, and now we have a president, by the way, the first black president, who voted against something called the Born Alive Infant Abortion Protection Act. Now, what does that mean? Is that if you go in for an abortion and that baby happens to survive, Pharaoh Barry, the image of the beast, the son of Satan in the White House, voted against an act that would have protected that live baby. Most people know that as murder. Okay? And Hillary Clinton, Queen Jezebel, of course, supports partial birth abortion, where a baby, the brains are sucked out with a catheter before it's allowed to be born, to avoid those sticky situations where a baby comes out of the womb and now you got a live human, but you wanted to abort it, so now you got to kill it. Avoid that kind of thing. So, you before you let the thing come out of the womb, you suck its brains out with a catheter. Okay, that's Queen Jezebel. All right, but again, it's the modern day result of the Margaret Sanger's Negro Project, okay, which was a synonym for the American Birth Control League or Planned Parenthood. Okay, now this is a nation, by the way, that started out in its founding documents that cited Jesus Christ, our Creator, by name. Okay, And I'm not one of these, just as an aside, I'm not one of these people that, that says the founders were part of the conspiracy. And, look, I mean, Ben Franklin, all right, there's a few of the founders, the jury's still out. Alexander Hamilton, was he a Rothschild agent, with the federal bank? Okay, but the organic United States, okay, the lesser known founders were all devout Christians. They handed us an imperfect, albeit imperfect, constitution, but one based on biblical principles. And we, at one time, were the greatest nation in the history of the world. Okay, so we've gone from George Washington, who I'm gonna argue. I would debate with these people that say George Washington was a Freemason. He was part of the conspiracy. He was a Freemason, as were many of the founders, but they looked at it more as a social club and a gathering than the Satan-worshipping Illuminati Freemasons that I refer to. Okay, so we've gone from George Washington to Pharaoh Barry and Queen Jezebel. Okay, just think about the contrast, and that's only happened in, what, 200-something years, 240 years, whatever it is. So think about that, okay? From where we've come from as a nation to where we are today, okay? Now, the mantra of the committees and correspondence were the backbone of the American Revolution was no king but King Jesus. Okay, so we've gone from that to Pharaoh Barry and God Bless Planned Parenthood. Okay, so the first so-called black president wants God to bless Planned Parenthood, which is synonymous with black genocide. Okay, and if you want to read up on that, there's actually a website out there called blackgenocide.org, by the way. It's one word, I believe, blackgenocide.org. I get their newsletters in my email. But if you want to see, just as an aside, the real picture of abortion, if you can handle it, if you can stomach it, I mean that literally, then check out that website, blackgenocide.org. But that's really the Cliff Notes version of the first several chapters. Okay, let's just say chapters 1 through 4. Okay, chapter 1 is the background, Adolf Hitler. Okay, we talked about Adolf Hitler. Chapter 2, an American gangbanger creation. Okay, philosophically and economically, as we discussed. Okay, post-World War II. Now that gets interesting. Okay, we've touched on that. Okay, and the eugenics is an interesting chapter in there. Eugenics. Okay, the eugenics. Remember, eugenics means good genes. Okay, that evolved, no pun intended, into the genetics movement. Okay, the manipulation of genes. Okay, and you can see that manifesting itself today with designer babies, GMO crops, and this sort of thing. Okay, but anyway, that's discussed in there. Camp Cancer. Okay, where the post-World War II Nazi supported. Okay, a lot of these Nazi doctors, by the way, the Nuremberg trials, for all intents and purposes, was another show trial for the imbecile majority, okay, the American population. A lot of the Nazi doctors, okay, made it out of Nazi Germany, okay, and they came and they got behind a lot of the newly formed CIA, okay, the Office of Strategic Services, and who's in the middle of that? But the Rockefeller gang. That name keeps popping up, by the way. If it has to do with the demise of America, the Rockefeller family isn't far to be found. If it's behind the United Nations, behind the radical environmental movement, behind the Federal Reserve, behind Adolf Hitler, behind the CIA, okay, is the Rockefeller family. Okay, the only thing more evil than the Rockefeller family is the Rothschild family, because the Rothschilds basically gave the Rockefellers their start way back there in the 1800s. But anyway, so you got the CIA, okay, and you had this marriage between these ex-Nazi scientists, fresh with their knowledge from all their studies of these concentration camps, and, okay, people like Werner von Braun, who came out of the Nazi rocket program, okay, who, one of the founders of of NASA. And that's not conspiracy theory, that's basic history, okay? So the Nazis came out, and they supported the post-World War II American biological warfare and rocket research. Okay. And what's this all leading up to? Okay, that's covered in chapter in chapters 3 and 4, okay, and maybe it's a good point to stop, but that's what's covered there. So where are we going with this? Okay, now so we have chapter 4, we'll call religious environmentalism. Okay, the new eugenics. Okay, remember what I said before. Okay, the United Nations has morphed from this supposed entity to bring world peace, which was a load of crap in the beginning, to the standard bearer, the tip of the spear, so to speak, of the invasion or the global warming environmental army that's taking over the world, or trying to, with this mantra of saving the world from climate change or global warming. Okay, and it's with a religious zeal that these people are operating under. And I mean that literally, okay, because once you take God out of the picture, you end up worshiping the earth. Okay, this is Romans chapter 1, worshiping the created instead of the creator. Okay, and again, I'm not talking about being stewards of the environment, like I said before. Okay, I'm not talking about legitimate environmental issues. Okay, I'm talking about dyed-in-the-wool wackos, genocidal psychopaths. Okay, and maybe that's a good point to stop. We'll pick it up in chapter 4, religious environmentalism, the new eugenics, and we'll get into things like the anti-10 commandments of the Georgia Guidestones and the wedding from hell. Okay, which is the marriage of the male and the female, the Osiris and the Isis of ancient Egypt. Okay, who gave us the modern day Pharaoh Barry, the modern day Egypt. Okay, so now, when I say modern day Egypt, I mean that literally, as much as I can. Okay, so now when you go back and you go back to the book of Exodus and you read about the 10 plagues, okay, they'll start making a lot more sense. Now, if you think about it, if the United States is the modern manifestation of Egypt, and it is, okay, there's that great pyramid of Giza on the back of your dollar bill. We got a lot to worry about based on the 10 plagues of Egypt, okay, here in Mystery Babylon. So I guess in conclusion, what I'm trying to do is tie in the Bible, the quote conspiracy, and a tangible event or series of events known as the American Eugenics Movement and Adolf Hitler, trying to tie it all together. Okay, so you're off the Trinity Broadcasting Network, hoorah kind of Rick Warren, Joel Osteen, comic book Christian crap. Okay. Anyway, the most important part of this all, okay, is God's Simple Salvation Plan, which is on the homepage of my website, boxofsunglasses.com. I highly suggest reading it and understanding it, and getting on the right side of what is about to manifest itself, what is about to manifest in the world. Okay. Rob Roselli, boxofsunglasses.com. Good night and God bless.